The Charleston sun spilled its golden light over Magnolia Cemetery, turning the marble headstones into glowing monuments among the shadows of the century-old magnolia trees. Louise Hartwell parked her black Mercedes at the gravel entrance, her hands still gripping the steering wheel even after she turned off the engine. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she was last here. She adjusted her Chanel sunglasses, checked her lipstick in the rearview mirror, an automatic gesture, her professional armor, and stepped out of the car. Her Louboutin heels sank slightly into the damp earth as she walked along the familiar path. The scent of magnolias mixed with freshly turned soil wrapped around her like an unwelcome memory. Robert Hartwell's grave was exactly where it had always been, beneath the oak tree he had chosen himself. "I want shade for eternity," he had joked, months before the heart attack that took him. Louise knelt, the hem of her beige linen skirt brushing the grass, and touched the cold headstone. "You were right about everything." "Robert," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time in years. "About Catherine, about me, about what really matters." She didn't cry. Louise Hartwell didn't cry. She had buried her tears with her husband 7 years ago and built a real estate empire on the wreckage of grief. Hartwell Properties was worth $80 million now. Work had been her salvation, or her prison. She wasn't sure anymore. That's when she saw it, the new headstone, just a few feet away. Louise froze, her heart stopping for a full beat before racing wildly. She rose slowly, as if sudden movement might make the vision disappear, and walked toward the white marble, still so new it gleamed in the sunlight. Catherine Marie Hartwell, 1995, 2025, beloved mother. "Friend, free spirit, no," Louise whispered. "No, no, no." Her legs gave out. Catherine, her Catherine. The stepdaughter she had raised since the girl was 7. The stubborn little girl with messy brown hair who used to bring frogs into the house. The brilliant teenager who dreamed of becoming an architect. The 19-year-old who had slammed the door and never come back. 30 years. Catherine was only 30. Louise collapsed to her knees in front of the grave, her hands trembling as she touched the cold marble. Fresh flowers rested there, white daisies, Catherine's favorite. And there was something else. Children's drawings on colored paper, held down by decorative stones. One heart-shaped drawing read in neat, careful letters, "For Mommy in Heaven, we love you forever." Emma and Grace. Emma and Grace. Louise's world spun. She stared at the names, trying to process. Catherine had daughters? Her hands flew to her mouth, muffling the sob that threatened to escape. "Did you know our mom?" Louise turned so quickly she nearly lost her balance. 2 girls stood a few feet away. Identical twins, about 10 years old, wearing simple floral dresses and worn sandals. But it wasn't their clothes that made Louise's world stop spinning. It was their eyes, deep brown, flecked with gold around the pupils. The same eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. Catherine's eyes, her own mother's eyes, gone decades now. The girl on the left, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, held her sister's hand. Her gaze was wary, guarded. The one on the right, with her hair loose around her shoulders, tilted her head with childlike curiosity, waiting for an answer. Louise's throat closed, her words catching. I was her mother. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant call of a bird. The loose-haired girl, Grace, Louise guessed, took a step forward, her eyes wide. "Are you Grandma Louise?" The nickname hit her like a blow. Catherine had spoken about her, after everything, after 11 years of silence. "Yes," Louise managed, her voice barely more than a raspy whisper. I'm your grandmother." The other girl, Emma, squeezed her sister's hand and stepped back, her small body stiff with tension. "Mom said you wouldn't love us," she said, her voice soft but defiant. "She said you didn't know how to love anyone but your work." Each word was a blade. Louise felt something shatter inside her, something she had kept glued together for years. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears finally burning her eyes. "I didn't know you existed." Louise Hartwell? A voice behind her. Louise turned, quickly wiping her eyes, and saw an elegant Asian woman, about 50, walking toward them. She wore tailored pants and a silk blue blouse, but her eyes were red, as though she had been crying recently. "Yes," Louise answered, forcing her professional tone back into place. "Who are you?" "Margaret Chen. I was Catherine's best friend." The woman stopped in front of Louise, studying her with an expression that mixed curiosity and something close to anger. "You finally showed up. I didn't know she had—" Louise couldn't finish the sentence. "When? How?" Margaret glanced at the girls, her face softening. "Emma, Grace, why don't you go put water on the flowers?" "I brought a bottle in my bag." Grace ran off immediately, but Emma hesitated. Her dark eyes locked on Louise with a piercing intensity far too grown up for a 10-year-old. Finally, she followed her sister, but kept looking back. "3 months ago," Margaret said once the girls were out of earshot. "Pancreatic cancer. It was quick. 6 weeks from diagnosis to—" Her voice faltered. Catherine didn't want aggressive treatment. She said she wanted to spend the time she had with the girls. Louise felt her knees weaken again. 3 months, she repeated, stunned. "And no one told me?" "Catherine didn't want you to know." Margaret's voice was sharp. "She said you made it very clear 11 years ago you wanted no part in her life." "That's not true." The words burst out of Louise. "I tried. I called hundreds of times." She changed her number, blocked my email. I even hired a private investigator, but she had completely disappeared. Margaret crossed her arms. "Catherine told me about your last conversation, about how you said she was throwing her life away, that she was impulsive and irresponsible, that she was making the same stupid choices her biological mother made." Louise closed her eyes. The words came back with brutal clarity, every syllable she had spat out that terrible night. "I was wrong," she whispered. "God, I was so wrong." "Yes, you were." Margaret didn't soften the blow. But Catherine was stubborn too proud to admit she needed her mother. She sighed, some of the hardness leaving her voice. "She made me promise something before she died." She said, "If my mother ever shows up, and Margaret, you know she will, because she's always been persistent when she wanted something, give this to her." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope, creased and worn at the edges, as if it had been held many times. The word "Mom" was written on the front in Catherine's familiar handwriting, large, dramatic letters, exactly as Louise had taught her as a child. Louise took the envelope with trembling hands. "May I?" "Not here," Margaret said gently. "The girls don't need to see you fall apart. Trust me, they've seen more than enough tears for a lifetime." Louise glanced toward the twins, who were arranging flowers on Catherine's grave, their heads bent close, whispering. Grace pointed to something on the drawing Emma held, and they both smiled, a small, sad, but genuine smile. "Where are they living?" Louise asked. "With me. For now." Margaret hesitated. "Louise, I need to be honest with you. Catherine named me as the girl's legal guardian in her will. She wrote it 2 years ago when she was diagnosed with a minor heart condition. She didn't expect the cancer. The ground fell away beneath Louise's feet. So you have custody of them? Legally, yes. For now." Margaret looked at the girls, her face softening. "But Catherine left that letter. And I knew her well enough to know she never did anything without a reason. If she wanted you to know about the girls, about everything, then there was a reason." Louise followed Margaret's gaze. Emma was kneeling by the headstone now, tracing her mother's name with her finger. Grace sat in the grass, weaving a daisy chain with the leftover stems. "They look so much like her," Louise whispered. "They are her," Margaret agreed. "Stubborn, brilliant, full of life," she paused, "and completely lost right now." Louise looked down at the envelope in her hands, then back at the girls. "Her granddaughters, Catherine's daughters. Can I meet them? For real, I mean. Not just here." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Read the letter first, then we'll talk." She started to walk away, then stopped. "Louise, Catherine may have been too proud to admit it, but she never stopped loving you. She had a picture of you in her nightstand drawer, one of you two in the garden when she was about 8. She looked at it every night before bed." With that, Margaret walked toward the girls, leaving Louise alone with the envelope and the weight of 11 years of silence. Louise traced her fingers over Catherine's faded handwriting, and at last, for the first time in 7 years, allowed herself to cry. Louise sat in the leather seat of her Mercedes, the air conditioning on but unable to cool the heat burning in her chest. The envelope rested in her lap, untouched for 10 minutes. Her hands shook every time she tried to open it. Across the parking lot, she could see Margaret helping the twins climb into a faded blue Honda Civic. Emma slipped into the back seat without looking back, but Grace paused, turned, and gave a timid little wave toward the Mercedes before Margaret shut the door. That small wave broke something inside Louise. She tore the envelope open. Catherine's handwriting was rushed, uneven, so different from the careful script on the envelope. Louise could picture her daughter writing this in a hospital bed, maybe late at night, while the girls were asleep and the reality of death drew closer. Mom, I started this letter 12 times. I tore up every single one. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I needed to say, and I was afraid to admit it. I was proud. You were too. Both of us, really. So alike we couldn't be in the same room without colliding like storms. You told me I was throwing my life away when I left home. You said I was making the same choices my biological mother did. And I told you that you never really loved me, that I was only ever Robert's daughter. We both lied, Mom. But we also told truths that hurt too much to face. Jake left me when the girls were 6 months old. You were right about him. He wasn't ready to be a father. And I was so furious at myself for proving you right that I couldn't call you. My pride was bigger than my pain. But every time Emma asked why she didn't have grandparents like the other kids, every time Grace drew families at school and left a blank space where you should have been, I died a little inside. I taught my daughters to be strong, to be independent, to need no one. And now I'm dying, Mom, and I realize I taught them all the wrong lessons. They need someone. They need family. They need to know where their strength comes from, and that strength comes from you. From the Hartwell women who never gave up on anything, even when they should have. Margaret is wonderful. She'll be a loving guardian, but Emma and Grace deserve to know where they came from. They deserve to know you. If you're reading this, it means you showed up. I always knew you would, sooner or later. You're that persistent. I am too. Was. Please, don't make the same mistakes with them that you made with me as a teenager. Don't put work before them. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Don't expect them to be perfect, because they're not. They're stubborn, dramatic, and fiercely intelligent. Just like us, Emma will test you. She's my protector, always has been. She'll try to push you away because she's terrified of losing anyone else. Be patient with her. Grace will love you immediately, but don't mistake easy love for deep love. She needs structure, someone who tells her no when she needs to hear it, just like I needed, and you never managed to give me. I spent 11 years angry at you, Mom. And then, I spent the last 3 months realizing I wasted all that time we could have had. That Emma and Grace could have known the grandmother who braids hair better than anyone, who makes those ridiculously good pancakes on Sundays, who can negotiate anything, even nightmares. Don't waste any more time. Please, love them better than you loved me. Love them in a way I can see from heaven and say, yes, that's my mom. I love you. I always did. Even when I said I didn't. I'm sorry I never said it before. Catherine P.S. The girls are allergic to peanuts. Emma is afraid of the dark, but she'll never admit it. Grace wets the bed when she's stressed. Please don't make a big deal about it. They love bedtime stories, especially the ones about when I was a kid. Tell the good ones. Tell the bad ones, too. They deserve to know the truth about who we were. Louise didn't realize she was sobbing until she could no longer read the words. Tears blurred the ink, smearing Catherine's signature. She pressed the letter to her chest, folding into herself in the car seat, and cried harder than she had since Robert's death. She had lost her daughter. She had lost 11 years. She had lost the chance to know her granddaughters as babies, to be there when Catherine was scared and alone with 2 newborns and a husband who had run away. But Catherine had left a door open. One last chance, and Louise Hartwell never wasted chances. 3 days later, Louise stood in front of a small house in a middle-class Charleston neighborhood. The lawn was neatly kept, but the paint on the window frames was peeling. Margaret's Honda Civic sat in the driveway. Louise looked at the shopping bag in her hand, stuffed with presents she had spent hours choosing, and suddenly felt ridiculously inadequate. Expensive books, Educational games. Designer clothes. What was she thinking? She didn't know these children. Didn't know what they liked. Before she could retreat, the front door opened. Margaret stood there, wearing a flour-stained apron, her expression carefully neutral. "Louise, you came. You said to come at 2, Louise replied, checking her Rolex. "It's exactly 2. Punctuality. Catherine used to say you were obsessed with schedules. It wasn't a compliment. Margaret stepped aside, leaving the door open. "Come in. The girls are finishing lunch." Louise entered a house that was the complete opposite of her colonial mansion on South Battery Street. Here everything was cozy, lived in. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, shoes were scattered near the door. The smell of fresh-baked cookies filled the air. It was the kind of home Louise had never created, not even when Catherine was little. Her house had always been immaculate, museum-like, perfect for magazine spreads and entertaining clients. "Emma." "Grace," Margaret called. "Your grandmother's here." Silence. Then cautious footsteps. The twins appeared in the hallway. Emma was in front, as always, wearing denim shorts and a t-shirt with a cat print. Grace was behind her, in a pale yellow dress with chocolate stains on the collar. "Hi," Grace said timidly, wiggling her fingers in a wave. Emma said nothing. She only studied Louise with those penetrating brown eyes, the same eyes that had once studied her when Catherine was a teenager, deciding whether to trust her with a secret. "Hello, girls," Louise said, her voice sounding far too formal. She cleared her throat. I brought a few things for you." She held out the bag. Grace stepped forward, but Emma grabbed her sister's arm. "Why?" Emma asked. Louise blinked. "Why? Why did you bring presents? You don't know us. You didn't even know we existed until 3 days ago." The casual cruelty of the truth cut deep. Louise glanced at Margaret, who simply crossed her arms, watching with clinical interest to see how Louise would handle it. Louise knelt down, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. The bag of gifts dropped to the floor, forgotten. "You're absolutely right," she said calmly. "I don't know you. And that kills me, Emma. It kills me because I should know. I should know that Grace likes yellow dresses and that you love cats. I should have been there when you were born, when you took your first steps. At every birthday." Emma's hard mask faltered. "Just a little. But I can't change the past," Louise continued, her voice growing steadier. "All I can do is show up now, and keep showing up. Every day, if you'll let me. Until you know me as well as I want to know you." Grace slipped free of Emma's grip and stepped forward. "Mom kept a picture of you," she said softly. "In her drawer. She looked at it at night." Tears threatened again, but Louise held them back. "She did? Uh-huh. It was of you two in the garden. Mom said it was the best day of her life because you had a picnic and you didn't answer any work calls the whole day." The memory came back with painful clarity. Catherine had been 8. It was a spring Saturday. They had made jelly sandwiches and camped in the backyard. Louise had turned off her phone, a miracle in itself, and Catherine had smiled all day long. "I remember that day," Louise whispered. "Mom said she hoped you could do that with us one day," Grace continued. "Picnics where you don't answer the phone." Emma was still stiff, but Louise saw something shifting in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe curiosity. "I'd love to have picnics with you," Louise said. "No phones. I promise." "Grandma," Grace began hesitantly, testing the word. "Do you know how to make cookies?" "Aunt Margaret makes cookies every Friday." "I know how to make pancakes," Louise offered. "Your mom used to call them magic pancakes because I'd put chocolate chips in them that made funny faces." For the first time, Emma smiled. It was small, reluctant, but it was a smile. "Mom talked about those pancakes," she admitted. "She said she never got them right." "That's because she never had the patience to wait for the pan to heat to the right temperature," Louise said. And suddenly she was smiling too, remembering Catherine at 12, frantically trying to make pancakes and burning every single one. She always wanted everything to happen immediately. "So do we," Grace said, rocking on her feet. "Mom said we got the Hartwell impatience." "It's a family curse," Louise agreed. The silence that followed was different. Less hostile, more curious. Margaret cleared her throat. "Why don't you show your grandmother your room? She needs to see the science project you're working on." The girls exchanged looks. Grace nodded eagerly. Emma hesitated. then sighed. "Fine, but don't touch anything." As Emma led the way upstairs, Grace grabbed Louise's hand, a gesture so sudden and confident it nearly made her stumble. The small, warm hand in hers felt both strange and perfectly right. "Grandma," Grace whispered once Emma was far enough ahead. "Emma's just testing you. She did that with every new teacher too. But if you stay, she'll like you. I promise." Louise squeezed the little hand. "I'm staying," she promised back. "Count on it." But as she climbed the stairs behind the girls, she didn't see Margaret in the hallway below, phone in hand, dialing a number she had memorized days earlier. "Hello? Yes. I'd like to speak to a family law attorney. It's about a custody petition." 3 weeks passed in a blur of painful lessons and small victories. Louise canceled meetings for the first time in a decade. Hartwell Properties kept running. The team was shocked, but capable, while she spent afternoons at Margaret's house, desperately trying to build bridges with two girls who felt both strangely familiar and completely unknown. She burned the first batch of pancakes. Grace laughed. Emma almost smiled. She tried to help with math homework and realized the curriculum had completely changed since Catherine was a child. Emma patiently explained the new method with an exaggerated sigh that was pure Catherine. She took the girls to Folly Beach. Grace built elaborate sandcastles. Emma sat on the towel, staring at the ocean with distant eyes, and Louise didn't push her to talk. She just sat beside her in silence until Emma finally whispered, "Mom loved the ocean." "I know," Louise replied softly. "I brought her here when she was your age. She found a perfect sand dollar and kept it for years." Emma looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted between them. But while Louise was slowly building a connection with her granddaughters, Margaret was building a wall. Louise's visits began to be rescheduled. Margaret had appointments, or the girls had too much homework. The excuses were polite, but the message was clear, and then came the registered letter. It arrived on a Saturday morning, delivered to her empty mansion by a legal courier. She opened it with trembling hands, already knowing what she'd find. Petition for permanent custody. Margaret Chen versus Louise Hartwell. The words leapt off the page like accusations. Historic negligence. Emotional abandonment of Catherine. A proven inability to prioritize family over work. A risk to the emotional well-being of the minors. Margaret was fighting for full custody, and she had ammunition. Louise dropped the papers, her hands shaking. She could fight this. She had money, powerful lawyers, influence. She could crush Margaret in court, but it would hurt the girls. It would force them to choose sides. It would make them relive losing Catherine over and over again in testimonies and hearings. The phone rang. Louise answered mechanically. "Louise? It's Margaret." The voice was tense. "I imagine you've received the papers." "You didn't have to do this," Louise said, her voice dangerously calm. "I wasn't trying to take the girls from you." "Weren't you?" Margaret's voice hardened. "Then why are you showing up every day? Why are you making promises you can't keep? Louise, you run an empire. How long until an emergency shows up and you disappear, just like you did with Catherine?" "I won't disappear." Catherine believed that too. When she was 8, and you promised to be at her dance recital, remember? You didn't show because you had an investor meeting. When she was 12 and you promised to take her camping, you canceled because you had a deal closing. When she was 15 and needed you at the parent-teacher conference because she was being bullied, you sent your assistant. Every word was a knife, and Louise had no defense because every word was true. "I'm not that person anymore," she whispered. "People don't change, Louise. Not at their core." Margaret sighed, and now there was sadness in her voice, not just anger. "I loved Catherine like a sister. I promised her I'd protect the girls, and I will not let you hurt them the way you hurt her. So what do you want? For me to disappear from their lives completely? I want you to be honest with yourself about who you are." Margaret paused. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. Bring your lawyer." The line went dead. Louise sat in her empty 6-bedroom mansion, for the first time in her life, wondering if Margaret was right. Maybe she couldn't change. Maybe she would always be the woman who chose work over family, control over connection, success over love. Maybe she should give up. The phone rang again. Louise almost didn't pick up. "Grandma." It was Grace's voice, small, scared. "Aunt Margaret said you can't come visit us anymore. She said it's about court papers." "What does that mean?" Louise's heart cracked. "Grace, honey." "Emma's crying." Grace whispered it like a terrible secret. "She never cries, Grandma. Not even at the funeral. But she's crying now, and she won't tell me why. Let me talk to her. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. She locked herself in her room." Grace sniffled. "Grandma, are you going away? Like Mommy did?" The question shattered Louise. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I'm not going away, Grace. Never. Do you hear me?" "Never. Promise?" "I promise." When she hung up, Louise sat for a long time, staring at the legal papers on her coffee table. Then she picked up the phone and called her lawyer. "Richard? It's Louise Hartwell. I need you to draft a response to a custody petition. And Richard, I want to do this the right way. I don't want a war. I want a solution that's best for the children, not for me." There was a stunned pause. "Louise, that doesn't sound like you." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But maybe it's time I become someone different." That night before the hearing, Louise couldn't sleep. She wandered the mansion, through rooms that had never been used. Furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts of a life she had never lived. She stopped at the guest room that had once been Catherine's, preserved exactly as it was when she left. Louise had never touched a thing, too afraid to face the loss. Now she entered. The walls still had posters of teenage bands. The desk still bore pen marks from late-night phone calls. A pink diary lay under the pillow. Louise had found it years ago, but never dared to read it. Now she opened it. The last entry was from 11 years ago, a few days before their terrible fight. "I'm pregnant, afraid to tell Mom. She'll say I ruined everything. But maybe this is my chance to do something right. To build the family I always wanted. A family where people are really present. Not just physically, but emotionally. I'm going to be different from my mom. I'll be there, always." Tears blurred the ink as Louise closed the diary. Catherine had tried to be different. And she had succeeded. By Margaret's stories, by the girls' memories, Catherine had been present, loving, devoted, until she got sick. Until she was taken away. And now Emma and Grace were in the same place Catherine once was. Afraid, losing someone, desperate for someone to stay. Louise couldn't give Catherine back to them. But she could show up. She could stay. She could try to be the grandmother Catherine had wanted her to be. She spent the whole night in Catherine's room, surrounded by memories. And when the Charleston sun rose, Louise finally knew what she had to do. 6 months later, Louise's mansion had been transformed. Where once there were manicured lawns and formal gardens, now a swing hung from the old oak. A treehouse, poorly built, because Louise insisted on building it with the girls, despite never having held a hammer in her life. A picnic table, covered with plates of pancakes. Emma and Grace ran across the yard, laughing, while Margaret tended the flower bed she had planted. "Because this house needs life," she had said. And Louise had agreed. From the porch, coffee cup in hand, Louise felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't perfect. Emma still tested her. Grace still had nightmares. There were days when Louise felt the pull of work, the temptation to check emails at dinner, to take a call instead of telling a bedtime story. But she didn't, because Catherine had been right. People could change. If they wanted it enough, if they had a good enough reason, and Emma and Grace were the best reasons Louise had ever had. "Grandma!" Grace ran up to the porch, her yellow dress twirling. "Emma said you can take us to the cemetery today? We want to bring Mommy new flowers." Louise set down her cup. "Of course, honey." "We'll all go together. Can I drive your car one day?" Emma asked, joining her sister. It was her running joke. She was only 10, but obsessed with Louise's black Mercedes. "When you're 16, Louise said, "I'll teach you myself." "Promise?" "I promise." And this time, Louise knew she'd keep it. Later, at the cemetery, she watched the girls place fresh daisies on Catherine's grave. Margaret stood beside her, and they had become something unexpected. Not just co-guardians, but friends. Catherine would be proud. Margaret said softly. Or surprised, Louise answered with a small smile. Probably both. Emma stood and slipped her hand into Louise's. You know what Mom used to say? She said family isn't about never making mistakes. It's about always trying to fix them. Louise squeezed her hand. Your mom was a wise woman. She was, Grace agreed. And she'd be happy we're all together now. As they stood before the grave, 4 women, 3 generations, stitched together by loss and love and second chances, Louise looked up at the sky and whispered the words she whispered every night before bed. Thank you for giving me a second chance, Catherine. I won't waste it, I promise. And for the first time since her daughter died, Louise felt something like forgiveness drifting through the magnolia-scented Charleston air. It wasn't the end of the pain. It never would be, but it was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning was all you needed. If this story touched you, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, stories that warm your heart and brighten your day. And share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading each one with care. Thank you for listening.